My name is Tatiana Thomas. My students know me as Chef Thomas. I am the culinary instructor at West Mecklenburg High School, and today what I'd like to show you is how to make soft dinner rolls. Okay? So as first and foremost, in every video I've done, you want to make sure you have your mise en place set to go. So for my mise en place today, I have 7 ounces of my butter. I've got my 2 eggs that I'm going to use in the recipe. And then I've got my egg that I'm going to use for egg wash. So once we're done making the bread, I'll show you how to create a beautiful golden crust on top of your bread. I've got my sugar, my dry milk solids. I've got my water ready to go, my bread flour. I've got my whisk, got my knife to cut up my butter. Can never be without a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon if you have, and just a normal sized bowl. If you don't have a bowl but big as this, that's fine. Whatever bowl you have in the house works well. If you do have a scale at home, by all means, scale your ingredients according to what the recipe states for the soft dinner rolls, but if not, measuring cups and measuring spoons will work just fine as well. And then I also have my handy dandy thermometer, which will also be, guys, will be in your kits, okay? And I'm the type of chef, like, I like to have my recipe near me because you just never know. I do not know everything, but I know how certain products turn out. So I just like to have my recipe near me just to make sure I'm following it according to what it states. So that I have gathered my ingredients and I've gathered my equipment. What we're gonna do is we're gonna warm up our water. So I'm gonna use a microwave to warm up my water. So while that water is warming up, you wanna make sure you're gonna warm it up to about 70 degrees. So one of the things we like to do in baking, because baking is a science, most products work well within a certain temperature. That goes for pâtisserie, that goes for chocolates, that goes for basically everything that you make. Certain temperatures help bring your product together, help blend and emulsify. It's another culinary term at you. So I'm gonna go ahead and check on my water, see how we're doing. Got about 30 seconds left on it. So while my water is going, I'm gonna go ahead and take our butter. And you want to make sure your butter is to room temperature. It's just a little harder to work with butter that comes straight out of the fridge. So I like to work with already softened butter. So typically speaking, while you're mise en placing, making sure everything is in its place, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut my butter into little chunks so that they're easier for me to work with. Now, if you have a KitchenAid mixer at home, you can cream these or beat these in your attachment and use your paddle attachment. But if not, like I said, you can make sure these come up to room temp, and so that they're easy and pliable to work with. So you can see I'm kind of pressing into it already because it's just already that soft. So I'm going to go ahead and check on my water that I just pulled out. So my thermometer is already on, so I'm going to go ahead and check to make sure. Oh, that is really good. That is really hot. Actually, it's a little bit too hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab one of my containers here. I'm going to go fill it up with just a bit of ice. If you notice that your water is too hot, like I said, temperatures are key when you're making certain products, especially doughs and pastries. So this is sitting at about 132 degrees. Go figure, only a minute in the microwave and it's already over 120 degrees. So I'm going to go grab a little bit of ice. I'm back, and I want to make sure I have the right temperature, because if I put my eggs into this, because you're going to mix your eggs with your water, your eggs could potentially curdle. So I want to make sure this temperature goes down. So I will be using all of this water, but I only took half of the water out just to bring it down to temp. So this water is currently sitting at about 68 degrees, so I'm going to go ahead and mix. Put it back, and then kind of keep stirring it. Alright, cool. And bring this down to about 70 degrees. So one of the components that we're using today in bread rolls, obviously, is yeast. One of the things yeast does beautifully is not only does it help leaven, and by leaven I mean help bring air, help bring lift, help your products rise in the oven. It also has its own characteristics of flavors, and it also has its own characteristics of how it kind of works into your product. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm gonna go ahead and crack my eggs. Whoops. It's okay. Go ahead, I saved the shells out of there. So when you're cracking your eggs, you don't automatically want to crack it on the bowl because obviously you don't want eggshells to get inside your product. So definitely crack it on the surface and then crack it into your bowl or whatever container you're using. So let me check my water again. Beautiful. And then so my eggs are mixed, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add my milk solids. So but some of you may be saying out there, well, are you just gonna put your milk solids in here? And then I'm going to mix it in gently. So again, you just wanna make sure you add your dry on top of your liquid. This prevents any clumps in the bottom, and it's also a nice way to make sure everything has come together quite nicely. So I'm going to check the temperature again. Cool. Still sitting pretty good. Then I'm going to go ahead and add my eggs. Add my eggs to the mixture. That to the side. Okay. And the reason why I'm putting everything together and still checking the temp, because the next step I am going to do is I'm going to add the yeast. Now the thing about yeast, you can kill your yeast. What? Yeast is alive? I had no idea, right? Yes, your yeast is alive. So when you add yeast to anything wet, it likes a certain temperature. So typically about 70, 75 degrees. I like to not go more than 80 when it comes to my yeast because it's too hot. If it gets too hot, then you will actually kill your yeast. So what I'll do is I like to kind of spread it a little bit. So I kind of bring it here. I'll spread it a little bit so you can kind of see what's going on. So you can kind of see them starting to bloom. So the moment it hits that nice warm water or warm milk, whatever you're using to help your yeast bloom, you'll start seeing it come out. It'll start sticking to whatever your liquid is. And you'll start to see them kind of poof up, kind of like a sponge, kind of sponge effect. You'll start seeing them kind of suck in that liquid. Give it a quick stir. Go ahead and add the rest of my yeast. Whoa, we got ghosts in this kitchen. Kind of give it a nice gentle mix. Alright. And then I will let the yeast do its thing here. And I'm going to let it bloom for a moment while I come over here and grab our flour. So, what I'm going to do with my flour is I'm going to go ahead and put it in our bowl. So according to the recipe you'll get, this is 100% bread flour, and this is about 4 pounds of bread flour. So what I typically like to do, obviously you want to make sure you clean as you go along, so you don't want anything kind of messing with you as you're making your product, you're making your bread. So I'm going to put all the dry ingredients together. Okay. Put our salt together. You can kind of still see the yeast is kind of starting to bloom, starting to absorb. It's no longer the little tiny granule beads you probably saw. Now they're kind of poofing up and coming together. I'm going to mix my dry ingredients. And then also what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my butter in here. And then using my hands, I'm going to kind of cut the fat, as you would say. Now, if you have a pastry cutter at home, that works nice too, or you can kind of have, it kind of looks like Wolverine claws. You kind of go in and kind of cut your fats with it. But if not, I like to take my hands and kind of just smooth and squeeze the butter like you're kind of patting it down, like you're kind of just turning it flat. Just a disclaimer, this is a messy process, so enjoy it, have fun as you're doing it. Get to feel your product, gets to know the consistency of your products, because as a chef, not only will you be able to kind of see and smell your products as you're cooking them, but being able to taste and touch your products kind of gives you a good, well-balanced kind of feel for how products work together. So going through the flour, just kind of seeing, is there any other butter that I need to kind of flatten and incorporate into this flour? Oh, here's one. So there's one right here. So I'm just kind of flattening it, mixing it. As you can see, I'm starting to see my yeast bloom real well. Kind of seeing it sitting on top of the milk. Again, this is kind of helping your yeast come open up, get ready to do its work, which is to leaven, create beautiful characteristic in your bread. It's just going to be good things. So as I'm going through my flour, I'm kind of feeling around to see if I have any more butter that needs to kind of be incorporated, and I do not. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just create a well. And if you can see that, I'm just creating a well into my bowl. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour the liquids in the middle. So that way, obviously, if you pour your liquid in everywhere, you're going to have clumps. And we want to try to avoid clumps. You want to try to control as much of your product as you can. And you can control that by just pouring in your ingredients slowly and really getting a feel for what you're doing. So I'm going to grab my liquid. Oh. Just going to pour a little bit in the middle. Kind of see where we're at. Go ahead and pour the rest of it. I'm going to use a rubber spatula. If you have a rubber spatula, spoon at home, get all of those little granules of your yeast, because every single yeast strand is important. Don't want to waste any product. So great. So now that I have that in there, I'm going to use my hands. I'm going to do a gentle folding method. So I'm going to go underneath and kind of bring the flour to me. Gently pull it up, bring the flour to me. Again, it's going to get messy. And so you want to kind of do this action for about 4 minutes because you're incorporating it. Okay? And also realize once you add liquid to your flours, it's going to create kind of this doughy consistency and texture. You want to start seeing that happening because the proteins in your flours mixed with your liquids is going to create two important protein strands, glutenin and gliadin, which is going to help create that elasticity you need, which will kind of trap the air in your bread and help it rise by creating a nice, fluffy consistency and texture on the inside. Woo. Now, if you don't like messes, tough luck. This is culinary. You're gonna have to deal with the mess, okay? You can also use, I like to use kind of like my fingers in this motion and just try to get everything off. Sometimes it gets really sticky, so I like to use my rubber spatula. Kind of get all of it off. And then kind of bring it together. Now I'm just going to kind of use my rubber spatula to kind of get this going. You can kind of see it's well incorporated. And now that I think of it, I left out one important step. You want to have a little bit of extra flour left over on the side, so that way when you start to knead it, you have an area what you're working with. So that way it doesn't become too sticky. So now what I'm going to do is move my stuff over to the side. Whoop. I'm going to work on here. Go ahead and start kneading my dough. So now that you have your dough well incorporated, you're going to work your dough. Okay? Probably should get a little bit more flour. So give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and grab some flour. So as a chef, I make mistakes. I forgot my flour. So I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit of flour on the side over here. You don't need a lot, just a little bit, because like I said, when you're doing this by hand, you just need a little flour so you can work with and start kneading your dough and getting that nice consistency and elasticity that you want to see in your dough. So, if you did this like me and started before you actually got your flour, go ahead, stop what you're doing, go wash your hands, your dough will be fine, get you a little flour, and then come back. So now I've got a little bit of flour spread. I'm going to work with my dough. So you kind of want to work fast, because as you can see, this is kind of getting sticky. So I want to try to turn this dough over, get some flour on there. Woo! Love it. Like I said, it's gonna be okay. Kind of get this dough off, kind of work with it, kind of get a little flour. Kind of like to gently fold it. A little bit more flour in here so you can get a little bit more control on your dough. As my chef used to say, make sure your area is well floured. So I'm just going to knead it. So really the kneading action is to help your protein strands get a lot stronger. Because as you can kind of see, this is, this is soft right now. And so what I'm going to do is try to work that out for about 2 minutes. Get it nice and kneaded. You use the flour to kind of help get this extra stuff off. Don't put it in your dough. Let it go, let it out. Kind of knead it. Let it come together. And then once your dough is kind of coming together, what you want to do is have your bowl out. Gonna have to use my handy dandy spatula, rubber spatula. And then I'm gonna grab my bowl. Okay. Woo! This thing is messy. You're gonna go ahead and put it in your bowl. And then you're going to let this sit in your kitchen, probably the warmest part of your home, and you're going to let it proof. So now that your ingredients are well mixed, now your yeast can do the job that it's going to do, which is going to help leaven and proof your dough. So that way, once you roll it out to the shape that you want to, it'll be able to bake in the oven pretty nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, go get this proofed, wash my hands, and be right back. Okay, now I'm back. So what I'm going to do is kind of clean up my area over here. Again, you want to work clean. You want to work low. Okay. So in normal circumstances, I would probably get my spatula and just kind of clean this off a little bit. Clean off your surface a little bit, because you don't want any of this old dough mixing with your proof dough. Clean that off a little bit. Okay. Okay. I'm going to grab a little bit more flour. Put it on the side. And grab my proof dough. So, when your bread is finally proofed, it should double or triple in size. So you can kind of see the difference between your dough starting off and then your dough after it's officially proofed. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy in the proofer. If you have plastic wrap, definitely use plastic wrap to cover it. If not, if you have a towel, definitely just put a towel on top of it. That should just do just fine. So, again, you're going to take a little handful of flour. Well flour your work surface area so things don't get as sticky as they did beforehand. Then I'm going to use my rubber spatula and get this guy out. So typically speaking, when you're working with dough, I try not to use all of it at the same time. Try to portion out a little bit that I'm going to work with. Try to work with small measurements at a time. Okay? So, now if you have a scale at home, it's much easier to use a scale because then you'll get the same consistent quality and quantity for your bread. So typically speaking, I like to do about 4-ounce rolls. Okay, so it's a little bit over. A little bit under. Almost. Okay, roughly speaking, this is probably about the size that you want to see. So when you're rolling your dough, you want to kind of palm it, and you want to kind of do it in a circular motion. And then when you're doing it in a circular motion, you want to kind of keep the dough round. And you want to try to kind of keep your hands cupped. And then at the end, you want to kind of twist it off. Have a nice little mount. Now, if that's too big, we can go 2-ounce rolls, because those will puff up nice and big. So again, if you don't have a scale at home, just kind of eyeball it. Eyeball what feels comfortable to you. Because again, these poofed for a little bit, but they will double. They will get bigger in size as they bake. It's about 2 ounces. So a little bit of flour and just the hand motion. Keep your hands cupped as you're doing this. So you kind of knead it and work it together. And then I try to get the bottom part and twist it so the tail stays nice and neat underneath. So you can kind of see my tail staying nice and neat, and I keep twisting it, kind of tying the tail underneath it so it can stay nice. So you have the difference between a 2-ounce roll and a 4-ounce roll. Or if you wanted to, 3-ounce roll. Yeah, so 3-ounce roll. So put a little flour on it. Again, the same cupping action. Same cupping action, and you just want to kind of roll it. Roll it till it comes together. You can kind of see my hand is kind of shaping it to a ball. And then I kind of twist the ends. Twist the little ends so that way the feet stays on the inside. And then so you can kind of see the difference between a 2 ounce, a 3 ounce, and a 4 ounce. Never see more than a 4 ounce. You probably don't want to go any bigger unless you're making like loaves, individual sized loaves for dinner. If you want to be fancy and creative, you can do different sizes. So you can roll out your dough. So when you're rolling out your dough, and so let's try that again. When you're rolling out your dough, and you can start to see it stretch back in, let it rest. That means you're overworking the protein, you're overworking your dough, and you're stretching it too much. If you work it and overwork it too much, you could potentially break and stretch it, and it could create like a different effect on your bread roll. It won't come out clean. You will definitely see once you bake it where you stretched your dough. So I'll let it rest for a second, and I come back, and then I'm going to kind of pinch off the ends with my palms, so you can kind of see these little two tails. And you can do like a little bread loaf in the oven. If you're feeling even fancier, what you could do is I make about, you can do a braided loaf. So I usually go about 1 ounce, about this size, and I make 3 little 1 ounce balls. It's a little too much. So 1 ounce balls. Ooh, that's way too much. Still way too much. Again, if you want to try to take off a little bit, kind of hold the dough and then just squeeze off what you don't need. Cool. And the same concept that we did for the long loaf. Grab a little bit of flour, roll gently using both hands. You want to kind of do like a butterfly motion to kind of help roll out your dough. If it stretches back in, I let it rest for a second. Push it to the side, use someone else. Use my first hand to kind of roll it a little bit, and then bring both hands into the picture. When you roll down, you want to butterfly out, butterfly out, butterfly out. And you're using your palms and the palms of your fingers. You never want to actually use your actual fingers to kind of roll out dough. You'll obviously cause indentions. So it's all in the palms. Okay? I'm going to roll this out just a little bit more to get it nice and thin. You want to kind of have like maybe 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches at most, especially when you're braiding. The longer it is, the easier it is to braid. So I'm just going to roll it out. Again, I'm going to check to see if it's rolling back in. It is stretching back in just a little bit. Just going to put this guy to the side, roll this guy out one more time. Again, butterfly, bring it in, bring it out, bring it in, bring it out. Until you've got pretty uniformed strands of your dough. So I've got pretty uniform strands of my dough. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these 3 strands, just like braiding hair. I'm going to pinch the top, so that way these stay. So I've pinched the top. Bring this one over. Bring this left side over to your right. Bring the right strand over to your left. And complete the cycle with using the one that was on my left and bring it over to my right. So you're always going to have at least 2 on one side, 1 on another. 2 on one side, 1 on another. 2 on one side, 1 on the other. 2 on one side, 1 on the other. And you kind of just keep repeating the same pattern until you get a nice braid. So typically what I'll do is I'll kind of pinch off and bring it under. Pinch off, bring it under. So you have like a nice braided roll. That's very pretty if you're doing dinners or you're doing something fancy or celebratory. And then last but not least, typically when I'm done, I'll go ahead and get these on a sheet pan. And then the last but not least part, you want to do an egg wash. So again, you want to crack your egg on the surface. Now you can typically, if you do have a pastry brush at home, it's usually like one of those pastry brushes you use when you're like basting your turkey. If you don't have something like that, you can use paper towel. So typically for an egg wash, equal parts egg to water. So typically speaking, one egg weighs about 2 ounces, roughly speaking. So you can just put 2 ounces of water. And then I have a folded up paper towel. So what this egg wash is going to do is it's going to create a beautiful color when it bakes. It's going to give a nice crispy film on top of your bread. So that way when it bakes, all the moisture and air stays inside. So when you break through it, it just will have a nice crunchy exterior with a soft fluffy interior. So you just don't need much, just a little bit. You don't want to soak it all the way. But you want to kind of just, brush it a little bit on the side. Make sure it's nice and shiny. Goes from a dull state to a shine state. I don't know about you guys, but this is very therapeutic. Just doing something you can focus on and just take your troubles away. Just kind of think about what you're doing in front of you. Okay, so now all of my bread has been egg washed. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop these in the oven and I'll be right back and show you guys the final product.